Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet.
Hello and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, The Sex Edition. And thank you for joining me. In this particular episode, I've entitled, What Would You Do? My executive producer shared with me a show that is on, it's on a cable network. I'm sure you can find it if you wanted to. It's called Naked Attraction. Yes. And the whole premise behind this show is they show people's bodies naked right when you meet them up front first, before you go out on a date, before you do anything else. And I think the concept is people think about it, but they kind of do all of this dance, all of this courting, and then have sex and decide whether they like the person. Well, in this particular case, you get to see what they look like in the raw and decide from the physical attraction if you want to go out on a date with them. And in the show, whoever is the particular guest, be it a man or a woman, if it's a man, then they'll have 5 women there, and they get to select from the choices, and they whittle it down. They'll ask the guest a number of questions about their preferences, and basically they wind up going to the last person. They go out on a date, and they follow up with them, and whether you're a man or woman. And it really was interesting because it brings to mind some thoughts. We had a conversation about it. In fact, I talked with a number of people about the whole perception. People think of it, but they don't necessarily do it. Well, the British obviously created a show around this whole idea, and there is full frontal nudity. So it's, you're in the raw. Like I said, they don't blank anything out. What they start by doing is they show the lower, from the waist down, and then they show a little more up, and then eventually they see the face. So the face is actually the last thing you see of a person. Now, when you meet somebody and they have their clothes on, what do you first see? A lot of guys tend to notice a woman's figure. I mean, we notice the eyes when you get close enough, but from a distance, what do you see? You see whatever is their physical shape, whatever clothes they have on, how they're fitted. We make a lot of decisions on all of these visual cues, men and women. I know this to be a fact because women say it all the time. Women were not considered very visually drawn to people, but we've found that not to be true. Women are very visual, and they will tell you so. It just initially came out as that men were more drawn to the visual because, we just didn't consider that women would be so like that, but that's not the case. And I'm not saying anything is wrong with it. I'm just saying, if you don't understand that already, let me break it to you. So guys, yes, it is important that you have your look on, that you look attractive, because women are drawn to men who are attractive to them. And you know what? To say it, we all have our preferences. Some guys are leg men, some guys are boob men, and women the same way. Some women don't like a guy with hairy arms and a chest, and some women do, because that's a very masculine trait. So that having been said, what the show did or does, again, I had never seen the show before. Again, the executive producer brought it to me to see and give me some thoughts about it. I said, I think we think of that kind of thing in the first place. I mean, ask yourself, when you have seen somebody, have you imagined them with their clothes off and imagine what the chemistry would be like? Because I think when you meet someone, you hope, I think for vanity's sake, we hope that we're attractive to them. But then we also hope that there is some physical chemistry. And I don't think we want to be saying that up front, because it might sound like, well, that's not a very moral thing to say, because I don't want to talk about sex because it might seem like that's all I'm thinking about. Well, you know what? It's actually a big part of a relationship. And I'm not putting morality into this, but it's important. And it's important that you know where it falls in line for you, so that when it's part of the conversation, then you can ask questions of yourself and then get them answered. And if having a good sexual relationship is important to you, then expect it and want to be part of it, because it's part of your relationship. And some people are turned off by not having a good physical chemistry. And if it's a situation where you've been in a relationship a long time and, you know, your sexual chemistry starts to wane, I mean, you know, there are lots of reasons things happen. It could be medical, and, you know, you talk to doctors about it. There are people that specialize in all these kinds of things, and you make it a point to deal with it. And when you know the answers, then you deal with it when you get the answers. But you don't just want to leave that in the weeds. But going back to the point of the show is, you know, it puts it out on Front Street, and it asks the question. I mean, it begs the thought that if you are attracted to somebody based on their looks, and you want to know what sex is going to be like, because maybe that's a deal breaker for you. And if it is, well, this is a way you kind of get to explore that. You can have sex first and then work on the rest of the relationship. And some people say, well, look, if you do that, then you will just get caught up in the sex and you'll have a bad relationship and you'll never get to the other parts, but way, way, way down the line and find out that you're not compatible. Yeah, that happens. That happens a lot. There are a lot of things that happen in life. But given that if that's something you want to know something about, like I said, I know people that if you have a bad sexual relationship, that is a deal breaker for them. A lot of other things can work well, but physical chemistry is very important. And again, each of us is an individual. What would you do given the choice to be in a relationship with somebody you really think very highly of, and the sexual chemistry just wasn't there? It just wasn't popping. And, you know, how do you navigate that? If you've had a great sexual chemistry with someone, but maybe the other parts of the relationship didn't work out. Not because you put sex first, but maybe because you grew apart for other reasons. You know, maybe somebody moved and went to college on the other coast, or had a situation where you just, you know, the relationship just grew apart. And that's not necessarily anybody's fault. And it's not the fault of having sex. I mean, sex is. It happens every day. People do it. I mean, there are babies being made all the time. So think about it for yourself. If you were faced with that situation, what would you do? Would you end the relationship? I mean, obviously we'll just suppose that you've had discussions about it, and you found out that maybe, hey, there's no compromise here. She can't go any further, or he can't go any further. And would you stay in that? Or would you discuss, say, maybe having an open relationship? Is that something that's a possibility for you? Open meaning you have the latitude. Obviously, you're discussing it up front. When you say having an open relationship, that implies that there's been a discussion about it. That means you have the opportunity or the latitude or the option to bring somebody else in to fulfill other needs in the relationship, be it physical or emotional. And, you know, polyamorous relationships delve into that all the time. And that's usually the main thing about something like that is it's discussed up front. It's open. It's not something that's done in hiding, because when it's not talked about up front, it becomes what we call an affair, and that's usually goes on the betrayal spectrum, and that's what usually sends people over the edge, and crimes of passion and all of that kind of wild stuff. You see? Okay, I'm going to take a break, I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about what would you do.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships. Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, the Sex Edition. I'm your host, John Johnson. What would you do? Here's a scenario. You go to a party. You meet somebody that you say have had maybe a passing interest in, and let's just say you forget you're in a relationship and you wind up being in bed with this person. You haven't yet done the whole thing, but you've just sort of exchanged some kisses and you might have just sort of gone down on each other a little bit, and somebody walks in on you and you know this person is going to tell your significant other. Are you going to go all the way through and just say, well, I've been busted, I might as well go ahead and finish having sex with this person? Or are you going to stop? And then, so what are you going to do? I posed this question to a couple of people, and the response was interesting. The guy said he would just go right on ahead and finish and do it and just say, hey, you know what? If he's going to get in trouble, he might as well get in trouble for everything. The other person said, you know what? They would stop right where they're at and just deal with the consequences from that standpoint. Because at that point, and here was the reaction. The guy said he would just go ahead and do it because, now this is one particular individual. I'm not saying all guys are like this, but his response was because he figured, look, I'm going to get in trouble. I might as well enjoy the moment and deal with the consequences rather than deal with the consequences and not have enjoyed the moment. And the woman said, well, she would stop right then and there. And from that, she's saying, if you haven't done the whole thing, then you can't be guilty of the whole thing. I mean, you get what I mean? And, you know, I kind of land in that camp simply because when you're thinking like a woman, and women think, and I know I'm kind of generalizing, but this is just from the conversations that I've had. See, women tend to think, well, from a standpoint of being affected by affairs, they tend to be more emotionally based. It's not just a physical thing. That when their emotional needs are being met, then it's a lot easier for guys to, say, bed them. And then maybe in the middle of this, the woman might have, guilt feelings and then call the whole thing off. So she might not go through the whole thing. But a guy, on the other hand, figuring, well, hey, if I get caught, I'm just going to get caught and I'm going to go through with it. Well, if you're the guy in this situation, I'm going to give you an option. If you don't go through with it, you can at least understand, see, a woman does the kinds of things that she does and will have understanding because in the middle of it, she's going to have that, oh, wait a minute, what am I doing? And stop. And if you're a guy and you're thinking about this from a woman's standpoint, if you stop in the middle, you probably have a good chance of being able to plead your case. But if you're a guy and you go through with it, figuring, hey, the punishment is going to be the same whether I do it or, got caught almost doing it, that guy is probably going to pay a heavier price from the girlfriend. So what would you do? Now, let's flip the situation. if you were a woman in this situation and you go all the way through with this, what do you think your boyfriend would do? Would he leave you or would he stay? Well, I think in cases like that, the guy would be very upset. He would probably try to figure out what's going on, but I think he would leave. So if you get in a situation like that, you have the potential, you better think about it ahead of time. And why do I say it? Because what happens generally is people get into these situations, they don't think them through, and they allow themselves to be vulnerable in ways that they don't really intend to. And then when they get caught, they try to think of some clever way to get out of it. They try to think of some lie, cop a plea, whatever it is. And you know what? It doesn't work. I will tell you, this is where, when in the other segment I was talking about having open relationships, and where you talk about things up front, you see, this isn't that kind of situation. This is something that happens because it wasn't an open, and that's why you're doing it. It's all behind somebody's back, and it's the betrayal part is what really upsets people. So I realize when you get in these situations, you're not going to be able to talk your way out of it. Not from the standpoint, not when you're guilty. You better let somebody else do the talking. So don't get in those situations, because you're going to ruin your relationship with the one. And if you have problems, you have problems. We all have problems, but you got to be real careful about how you solve them, especially when you start having sex with another person, because you got some people that really flip out on stuff like that. And I have seen some craziness in my life. Now, I'm not saying I've done crazy. I said I've seen crazy. And having talked to a number of people about these situations, it's hard to imagine some of the things that human beings do when they're upset about who their lover has been with. And I will say this, and this has been a conversation that guys have had over and over again, especially when it comes to them cheating. Guys have said, you know what? She was probably more upset because the woman was not as attractive, but when the woman is better looking, the girlfriend wasn't nearly as upset about cheating on her. And I find that interesting. I haven't yet gotten a clear response from a woman as to why she feels different about it if the woman is more attractive when she gets cheated on, as opposed to why she is more upset when she's not as attractive. I know they say, well, you left me for her kind of thing. I know that, but that's too simplistic. I'm going to delve deeper into that. I'm going to report on that when I get an answer, because I think that's pretty interesting. Because I know we go for the low-hanging fruit sometimes when we answer some of those questions, at least in the general public. But I kind of like something a little more, fresher and newer understanding about that. So, again, you be careful. You don't go out there and start sleeping around and thinking you're going to be able to get caught and explain it. So, best you not do that. Open relationships, have the discussion up front, get permission, sign on the dotted line, however it's going to be. But when you don't have that up front, stay away. And let me tell you, and this is just how life goes, don't think you can hide that stuff. You will be found out. It's just how it goes. You will be found out. Guys, you know it. Women, it's interesting how they say women can hide sexual relationships, sexual affairs better than men, because women are good at being deceptive, because guys just assume that the woman's not smart enough to be able to hide something like that. Well, let me tell you guys, I have known women, I have not been involved with women. I'm just saying I have known women. They have told me about how good they are at hiding stuff, and that the guys just aren't really good at figuring it out. I mean, unless they're following them every minute and they put tracking devices on cars, and yeah, people do that kind of thing. So that's another reason why you better be sure about what you're doing, because there's private detectives and all kinds of technology out there. You can track you on your cell phone now. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, it's all kind of crazy stuff. See, look, I'm going to take a break real quick, and I'm going to come right back and wrap up this Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, the Sex Edition. What would you do? Stay tuned.
always on the go, but the day just won't be one without your Hollywood fix. Let Golden State Media Concepts Entertainment Podcast take care of that. Jordan and Keith is Entertainment Tonight meets Access Hollywood.
I'm Jordan. The guy laughing, that's Keith.
Yeah, I'm Keith.
An all-inclusive look of pop culture. Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, the Sex Edition. And I'm your host, John Johnson. This is entitled, What Would You Do? This particular topic I'm going to cover in this last bit and on the way out. And it was about younger men and older women. And I know I have talked about this before, but it just came up about 4 days ago. I was talking to some women because they know that I'm the podcast guy. And they were wanting to talk about younger men and older women and the sexual aspect and what their interests were, and how they got to be from where they were in the older relationships that they had, because they had all had been previously in marriages, and they have since transitioned from that. They were at the gym, they're taking care of themselves, getting themselves fit, and they find themselves being the object of attention from younger men. So they sort of fancy themselves having a relationship with someone of the opposite sex who's a bit younger, and they were very intrigued because they obviously are not dead yet, so they're interested in sex. And it's what the attraction is. I think they obviously don't have to be perfect bodies, because I don't think guys are looking for that. That is something that we are more and more coming to accept is a creation, and certainly there are very beautiful people out there. That's not to say that they don't exist, but I think as far as the mainstream and what people do and what people aspire to, everybody's a work in progress. So even if you don't have perfection now, I mean, you can still work towards it. But if you're attracted to somebody or somebody's attracted to you, then embrace that and accept that for what it is. And as you work on your body, you're sculpting, and in this particular case, because these women were at the gym and they were in the spin class and everything else associated with it, the part about, well, what's the attraction? What's that like? Well, I'll tell you, it's just as real, just as genuine as in any other relationship. And I would not expect a younger man to treat you any different. I mean, if he's immature, then he's immature. I mean, you can read that from a mile away. But I think what you get sexually from a younger man, and relative in this age, these women were late 30s to late 50s. So like I say, it was 4 of them. And well, what you get is you get a younger man who has had some sexual experience, and he's willing to share that. He's willing to pass that on. And the oldest woman of this particular group, having been in a long-term relationship, she was sexual and very new at it, and stayed in her relationship for a long time. So when she got out of it, she considered herself very inexperienced. So taking a younger man on seemed a bit, it would be an adventure for her. But I said, take it on, because, hey, he's going to show you things that you've probably not experienced. I mean, a lot of women have, unfortunately, not had an orgasm, a very deep one. And to have somebody who's experienced at that and wants to share that with you, wants to give you that experience, would be, I think, a wonderful treat. And in her own words, she thought, well, yeah, I think that would be nice. It would feel nice to be doted on for a while. And I encouraged her, hey, if the man is interested in you, take that on. And, why that is, you have some things that are happening here. Physiologically speaking, as women get older, say in their 50s, mid 50s, even in their 40s, their libido tends to go up. and partly because she can focus on herself. A lot of times they are past the child rearing or childbearing part of their life, and they can begin to get past all of those responsibilities, and there's a lot less anxiety in their lives about the family aspect, raising kids, having babies, that kind of thing. And as women have explained to me, when they're in their 50s and in their 60s, because all of those things are behind them, they feel a lot less inhibited. They tend to know themselves better. And for that, when the men come into their lives, they're definitely a different person than they were, say, 20 or 30 years before that. And when it comes to sex, they still have that curiosity about it. Now, clearly there are women who are shut down and have decided that, there's nothing there for them. But this program is not for those women. This program is for the women that are open to who they are and exploring something new and wanting to be open to those sexual relationships because they find themselves still interested in having a physical relationship, being involved with somebody, because it's integral to who they are and to their chemistry. And there's a lot said about being sexual in that it releases endorphins. There are all sorts of hormones in the body that get released, and the pleasure. And when you experience that, you're a happier person. I don't know a woman who's had great sex that doesn't seem to have at least a pretty happy disposition. I'm not saying everything's working in her life, but I'm just talking about in general, she tends to have a better attitude and a better disposition. And the same for guys. Okay. I mean, it's not like for guys just having an orgasm is this low-hanging fruit, because guys have to work at it too, especially when they get a little older. But this topic in particular is for the women, and the conversation, the discussion group that I was having, and their interest in trying something different. And even one of the young ladies was, I say young, but relative in this group, she had never been with somebody outside of her own culture. And she has met several men who seem to find her attractive, and they're not of the same culture. And she was just wondering about that and wondering what the sexual aspect would be. I says, well, there you are. You can experience that for what it is. And, you decide for yourself, because what it is, you have lots of choices, and you're limited only by what you see in your mind. A person is attractive to you because of how they treat you, then go for it and make your decisions based on how you feel, and don't let somebody talk you into something that you don't necessarily want. So that having been said, the group of them have kind of formed this sort of sisterhood, and they decide amongst themselves, because they'll discuss different aspects of men and the relationships that they've had, and whether this is a good situation or not such a good situation. And it's really interesting to see them grow and blossom and to find people that they want to include in their lives, and go out on dates and talk about what's happened and form relationships. And if this fits you, if this sounds like you, then I encourage you to explore that possibility with your own self. I mean, certainly, as a woman, feeling attractive and somebody paying attention to you is great, because you get up in the morning and you smile at yourself, you take care of yourself, you look at yourself and whatever you consider your imperfections, and know that somebody accepts you. And if it's a younger man, great. But you accept yourself, and what you will find is other people will accept you too. Because it starts with you. Like I say, what would you do? I would encourage you to learn to accept yourself, and then you will find that people will accept you. And the beauty of that is people do it genuinely, not just to get at you, but there are a lot of good, loving, honest people that want to be in relationships, and they're not that hard to find. We all do our screening process. That's your due diligence. You do that. But in the interest of getting yourself out there and having a great relationship, and developing a great physical connection with somebody, something that's important, significant to you, something you can do in a commitment, that works. That's special. And I think you'll be happy. And, take note, write poetry, do all of that stuff. Take note of your life and embrace it, because it's a wonderful thing when it happens and it's good for you. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, the Sex Edition. I'm your host, John Johnson, and I've been asking, what would you do? Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From sex and relationships to health and wellness, life and happiness, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast.